working through all the videos for the BERNINA L890 serger, and in this one let's talk about changing your needles. So right now I actually just have one needle in, so I'm going to first kind of show you how to put one back into position. I'm going to be using two tools that are commonly stored in the accessory front door here, but I tend to use them so much I almost just keep them beside it. But before I clean up for the day, I will usually put these all back into their locations so they don't get lost. They're always right where I need them to be. I also have the needle I had removed stuck in the little kind of pincushion area right inside here. Great little place to kind of hold your needle until you need it back. So here's how we're doing it kind of in reverse. Usually I show people how to take needles out, but this time I'm going to show you how to put needles in. Then we'll talk about how often you need to actually change needles. So the little needle threader on the opposite end is a needle holder. And not just a holder, but it'll actually help keep the flat side to the back. So when you put it in there, it doesn't spin around and you have to try to keep that facing the right direction. Next, to use this, you do need to hold it directly in front of you. So if you're coming in this way from the side, that's not going to work very well because now your flat side's actually facing the inside of the machine. We also have a special screwdriver, it's kind of a torque screwdriver, that we are going to use at the top. So when I took this needle out, I had to tighten that screw all the way in so it was nice and secure. So vice versa, when I come to put my needle back in, I'm going to have to loosen that screw enough so then the needle can get all the way to the highest position. Now this one is actually the left needle. So as I zoom in here, you're going to notice that when the needles are in here for overlock stitching, the left one will be higher than the right one. So you always know if you're checked, okay, did I get my needle all the way in correctly? As I approach the foot, I like to put the tip of the needle down into the machine, and then if I have another needle in it, by the way, is really handy, I know that I can come up right beside it. Now as I hold this up and I come to the top screw, that's the one that we need to loosen. Above the top screw is like a little window. Up at the window you can actually see if the top of the needle. And if we look underneath, we can now see that the needle is actually higher than the one on the right. So once you have it there, just go ahead and continue to hold and tighten it. And then you can just slide this straight on down and then double check that your needles are two different heights. So one thing I like to do is actually, if I'm ever changing needles out, I always try to leave one needle in at any given time, because in that way I can do just that, check to see that I have it at the highest position. So if I'm taking them both out to change them to another needle type, or it's time to change them, I'm going to take one out, put a needle in, take the other one out, put a needle in. If I am switching from left side to right side and doing like a 3-thread, then I could go ahead and put the one that I'm missing in, check, and then remove the one that I'm no longer using. So instead of just taking one out and sliding it over, it's actually easier to always have one in there, because then you know exactly kind of how and where to guide it so it goes right where you want it to be. Without a needle in there, you have to kind of like, okay, where is that top little part? So that's a little trick that I always tell my students, is just leave one in there. Now, in the worst case scenario and they both break, you can just go ahead and deal with it and put the needles in. I always put in two, make sure that left one is higher than the right one, and that's going to make all the difference in the world. You will definitely want to make sure that you have needles that match your fabric, and you don't go any smaller than a size 70 or larger than a 90. That's pretty standard for sergers these days. So definitely you can use some thinner needles for when you're working on finer fabrics, and use some bigger needles when you're working on some heavier fabrics. You can get into using top stitch needles if you're using some thicker threads in your needles. Usually most thick threads go in the loopers on a serger, but you know, we always like to switch things up and be a little bit more creative. But just keep an eye on those needles. When you are threading for cover stitch, you are using the front ones, and those needles are actually a good 1/4 inch in front of where the overlock needles are, but over here on this side. So they're in a totally different position. They too have those little windows at the top, so you can see that the needle gets all the way up as high as it's supposed to go. I do love that they've added visual double check places for when I change my needles out. If you're having any skip stitches, you're having any thread breaks, probably just due to a new needle, and honestly, you should be good to go.